Welcome to the Explainer. So today we're going to objectively map out a really fascinating, incredibly dense, and, well, distinctly partisan piece of source material. This source outlines what it basically describes as an all-out war being waged against this deeply entrenched globalist establishment. We're going to break down the exact narrative it builds, tracking its claims across international policy, public health, and even campaign finance. It's like a giant puzzle, and we're going to visualize exactly how the source connects all these seemingly disconnected dots. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's dive into this. The source starts right out of the gate with a really bold framing. It paraphrases the famous military theorist, Karl von Clausewitz, saying, "Politics is war by other means." And the source uses this exact lens to argue that recent historical events, literally right up to current political assassination attempts, well, they aren't just isolated random incidents. Instead, it frames them as part of a massive, highly coordinated, ongoing political conflict.
To make sense of all these sprawling claims, the narrative is broken down into 6 distinct fronts. We've got the warfare thesis, global alliances, the science priesthood, COVID investigations, funding networks, and finally, the scorecard.
Right, so kicking things off with front number 1, the political warfare thesis. Now, how does the source actually define this? According to the video, this political warfare is a coordinated multi-front struggle currently being waged by the Trump administration. And the stated target? What the source explicitly labels a corrupt, British-led globalist establishment. Notice the phrasing here, right? The stakes are presented as completely existential. It paints this picture of an epic battle between sovereign American interests and a foreign-directed syndicate. To really elevate those historical stakes, the speaker points to a very specific lineage of targeted American leaders. We're talking Hamilton, Lincoln, McKinley, FDR, JFK, Reagan, and Trump. The video makes a point to note that they were all either shot or killed. The central argument they're making here is that the origins of these historical assassination attempts are often tied directly back to London and a broader, centuries-old globalist resistance. Moving right along to front number 2. Challenging the global alliance.
And this brilliantly illustrates how the source maps out the core foreign policy conflict. On one side, you have the alleged globalist goals, which they claim are maintaining a forever war in Ukraine and enforcing what they call a climate cult to suffocate economic growth. Contrasted against this, you have the claimed Trump administration goals. The source says these involve actively dismantling that globalist system and reasserting the Monroe Doctrine to completely secure the Western Hemisphere.
To back up its claims about foreign alliances, the speaker pulls a quote from Lord Ismay. He was the first Secretary General of NATO back in 1949. The source uses this old quote to make a very modern argument. They're asserting that NATO is essentially a paper tiger and that its true purpose is just to keep America roped into British policy and permanently locked into a conflict with Russia. So how exactly does the source claim this massive system is being fought? Well, it asserts that a huge dismantlement is secretly underway right now, driven by leaked memos and administrative retaliations. The source alleges there are active threats against UK control of the Falkland Islands, threats to boot Spain right out of NATO, and blockades on Iran's oil industry that are allegedly costing the IRGC $500 million every single day. The narrative here is that the global chessboard is being aggressively shut down.
Okay, shifting gears to front number 3, the scientific priesthood.
Just the number 22. What does this mean? According to the source, this number represents the entire National Science Foundation Board of Directors. The claim here is that all 22 members were fired in a single email, effective immediately. And the justification for this alleged purge? The video claims these agencies were no longer funding real science, but were actually operating as a political machine, funding what they call political foot soldiers.
To further illustrate this domestic dismantlement, the source points to some absolutely massive financial shifts. It cites an alleged $1.7 billion cut to the National Science Foundation and an enormous $15 billion cut to the National Institutes of Health, slated for 2025. Now, the speaker argues these aren't just your standard budget trims. They say these are deliberate strikes aimed at defunding billions of dollars allegedly spent on diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, as well as systemic political operations. The video frames this as a battle between 2 totally distinct ideologies of human progress. On one hand, you have the captured priesthood, which they characterize as government grants funding political operations. On the other hand, you have sovereign science. The claim here is that true scientific advancement relies entirely on private capital. To prove this, they highlight that $7 billion was recently raised privately for American fusion startups, entirely without relying on federal grants. Which brings us to front number 4, the COVID-19 investigations.
Let's move to this timeline and see how this builds. The source constructs a very exact chronological sequence to support its claims. It alleges that back in 2018, British zoologist Peter Daszak proposed engineering coronaviruses in Wuhan. Then, fast forward to February 2020, it claims Daszak organized a letter in the Lancet Medical Journal to preemptively label any lab leak theory as a pure conspiracy. Finally, in February 2021, the source points to a major apparent conflict of interest, noting that Daszak joined the World Health Organization team to investigate the very lab leak he allegedly helped fund.
Following this, the source asserts that the walls are rapidly closing in on these key figures. It details claims that David Morens, who they label as Anthony Fauci's bagman, has been indicted for concealing records and deleting emails. It positions Daszak as absolutely central to what it calls a politically motivated lockdown operation. And it claims Anthony Fauci himself is facing mounting scrutiny as this entire apparatus allegedly unravels under intense legal pressure. Now on to front number 5. Targeting funding networks.
The source outlines this highly complex financial operation that it refers to as a shell game. First, it claims Arabella Advisors acts as actually scratch that, more like a central control node, moving billions from mega donors right into shell nonprofits. Second, it alleges the donation platform ActBlue functions as a massive money laundering operation, specifically stealing the identities of senior citizens to make illicit donations. And finally, it accuses the Southern Poverty Law Center of being a political slush fund, allegedly laundering 9-figure sums entirely through offshore accounts.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is this highly specific number, 146. To support its claims of massive wire fraud happening within ActBlue, the source states that during congressional depositions, 5 high-level ActBlue employees pleaded the Fifth Amendment a combined total of 146 times. The speaker uses this detail to argue that the legal dam is completely breaking on these fundraising networks.
But, the claims about illicit funding don't even stop there. The source asserts that shadow funding sources are actually replacing traditional donors. They specifically name drug cartels and massive welfare fraud operations. To put that into perspective, the speaker points to a single day where the FBI allegedly executed 22 search warrants across Minnesota daycares. The video asserts this was a highly targeted raid to cut off up to $9 billion in fraudulent welfare money from flowing straight into campaign coffers.
And that brings us to the final front, number 6, the source's final conclusion.
So the crucial point is how the speaker tallies all of these incredibly diverse events into one final scorecard. This list, these indictments, firings, investigations, it's presented by the source as absolute, undeniable proof of victory in this ongoing political warfare. From James Comey to the National Science Foundation all the way to the SPLC, the source argues this isn't just random news. They say this is what the deliberate, systemic dismantlement of a political enemy looks like in real time.
Finally, the speaker offers a thesis for why all of this is supposedly happening right now. The source argues that with midterm elections just 6 months away, a deep, pervasive panic is setting in among the so-called globalist resistance. According to this narrative, this looming electoral deadline is the exact reason why the political warfare and the desperate countermeasures they claim are happening are intensifying at such a breakneck pace.
Regardless of where you stand politically, seeing the sheer density of this narrative laid out visually like this is absolutely fascinating, and it really forces us to ask a vital question. How do these sprawling, conspiratorial, multi-front narratives of political warfare actually shape our media consumption? And maybe more importantly, how effectively do they mobilize voters ahead of critical elections? Understanding how these kinds of stories are constructed from the ground up is absolutely essential for navigating today's complex political media landscape. Thanks so much for joining me on The Explainer, and remember, always keep questioning what you see.